the Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast featuring the Crop Doctors.
Good morning from the Crop Doctors Podcast studio in Stoneville. Brian made the drive over this morning to be with Tom and I. So, Brian, appreciate you coming over and visiting with us about cotton.
Well, good morning.
Always good to see you.
Yeah, glad to be back on those stomping grounds.
Yeah, welcome home. This is on, what's today, Tuesday?
Today is the 30th of April, Tuesday.
So there's going to be a little bit of a drag time between when we record this and when we drop it. So we know a lot of stuff is going to change since most everybody missed the big part of that rain yesterday, which would have been
the
29th. Sunday night, Monday. At least most folks on the east side of the river missed it. So planters are rolling again today as it has dried up. And so we know there's a lot of stuff will change by the time y'all hear this. But this is when we had an opportunity to get together and talk about planting and cotton and the things that are going on with the cotton crop. Brian, before we get going, I got a question for you. You know I do.
Oh, yeah.
And so this is good. This is right up your alley. What was the first thing that you remember doing on the farm when you were growing up that was actual contributing something?
Well, let's see. I guess stomping around in a cotton trailer was not contributing to
Well,
anything,
right.
That's probably the earliest memory I have.
Mine too, by the way. But
now, I would say it was probably those hard plastic PVC irrigation pipes. Just getting in an assembly line with the crew and just picking them off the trailer and hooking them together.
Yep.
And then the earliest tractor driving memory I have is running a roller on some soybean ground.
Okay.
So, I mean, I couldn't really destroy anything unless I ran off in a ditch or something.
So mine was the irrigation pipe, but driving the tractor for the pipe trailer. Basically, you couldn't tear up anything there either. You just had to keep it in the turn
keep it
road.
straight, yeah.
And I was swerving all over the place.
That's probably the two first things I did.
Daddy talks about throwing dirt clods at the back glass when I fall asleep, which was probably all true.
Yeah. Well, we used to throw dirt clods at each other just to be mean, but
dirt clod is a good projectile. I used to peg Bobby Golden with a dirt clod every chance I got.
That'll spike some anger in you.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Nothing's funnier than a mad Bobby.
Moral of the story, don't turn your back on Jason.
Not if there's clods.
Yep, dirt clod coming.
Buckshot clods, they get a little hard. You don't want to throw them at top speed. I'm old now. I can't throw like I used to.
You're right. Don't throw your arm out. You got a little shoulder.
Jason has Tommy John surgery.
That's my left shoulder. Left shoulder's the one that's bad, Tom, so I'm good on throwing.
Huh, how come Jason's been out? Well, a little problem with a dirt clod a couple of weeks ago. All right, Brian, it's cotton planting season, and it's pretty important to start talking about some of those things. But and you'd said before we started recording that your call load has just exploded. What kinds of questions you running into right now? What are people calling about?
Mainly, I'm getting started planting, looking at the germ on the bag. There's a lot of conversations about germ and what that means. What's a good number? I don't know if they hadn't been paying attention to it. And then there's been a lot of talk about seed quality and cool germ. Just questions about that. That'd be one thing. And a lot of it was just people getting started and us making plans about our coordinating our OVTs and our county demonstrations. The moral of the story with the call load is everybody is starting. If we don't get this rain this weekend and this drops next week, I would say we'll be almost through planting a lot of it.
I said that this morning. I don't know how many Delta-wide and for sure statewide, when we really hammer it, I don't know how many thousands of acres of everything collectively that we can plant in 3 or 4 days. It's amazing.
Well, if you figure they project 500,000 acres, that's up from last year, but it's still not where it used to be. But
yeah, I was going to ask what you thought intentions would be.
Yeah, it's still the equipment. A lot of planters in the field cover a lot of ground. I mean, we could knock that out in 10 days easy, but everybody gets different weather. Some people prefer to plant a little bit later. The projection, to answer that question, 500,000. That's the last I saw, which is up from, 390? And that's kind of where we were I'd say 21, 22.
Yeah, that sounds right. And heck, I mean, I've been poking around some places. I was down through some parts around Natchez last week, and my assumption is some of those places are planting cotton because they didn't have beans in. They had fertilizer out already.
Yeah.
In some places, dry fertilizer. They had corn last year in some of those, and they tend to be a corn-cotton rotation. So,
Yeah, I think we replaced a little bit of corn, just due to the price. Cotton's down a little bit. I looked this morning, I think December was 77 cents. But, I mean, it's still looking better than it did last year in terms of price. And, I'm still hoping for a little bit more.
If we call today May 1st, planting progress in your estimation compared with the last few years?
I'd say if we don't get this rain, I'd say we're ahead. Last year we had a pretty good planting window, but that seems like it started 4 or 5 days later. Seems like May 3rd is when it really kicked off, whereas last week we planted some acres in the North Delta, I know, and then, took a few days off and then plant the rest of this week. We'll be a week ahead.
Yeah, because the corn's been spread out. We talked to Eric about that last week. Soybean planting it's getting to be spread out too. I was just curious about what you thought about the cotton.
I would say if the meat of the planting should be ahead of time based on a few days last week. If we get Tuesday through Friday this week, get a half-inch of rain like they forecast, and then next week, I would get a lot of cotton planted.
Yep.
Now, if the forecast changes and then we get this week a rain and it stays wet, then it's going to kind of start spreading out.
with all that in mind, Brian, and obviously cotton getting ramped up and everything, and I know we've talked about some new technologies and some new traits that are available. What do you see as being the expansion of some of those acres this year?
Some of the newer things that are on the market would be, from a herbicide standpoint, would be the Accent Flex cotton that's offered by Stoneville Cottonseed. But the problem with that is the azoxaflutol is not labeled in cotton. So
correct.
A little bit of a hiccup there, but the cotton is out there. It's in our own farm variety trial. So we'll get to see from a performance side of it, get to see how it performs.
Have you looked at the varieties before? Have you seen it?
We've done some work with the herbicide part when it was stewarded, but it wasn't this variety, this particular number. This is probably a higher yielding variety. This is the first time I've looked at it as a marketed number.
Do you just have some of those in the on-farm trials? Do you have some of those in the OVTs?
It's in the on-farm trial and it's in the OVT.
Okay.
So those of you that are not familiar with the herbicide Brian spouted out, azoxaflutol. So we use that, or have used it in the past in corn. It was sold as Balance, and then later on as Balance Flex. We never used a lot of it in the South. The Bayer product called Corvus, it had azoxaflutol in it too, and that's strictly a corn herbicide. It was a premix with another product. So we just haven't used it a lot. So it's strictly a residual treatment, so it'll be at planting, and there's no post-emergence control with it to speak of that I've ever seen. It's good on Palmer, which is still what dictates a lot of our weed control decisions.
Yeah, and like it's just another mode of action you can lay out there, with some of the things that are threatened right now. That's the only variety, it's Accent Flex 6000 Stoneville in the home farm. But in the OVT, all of those varieties are geared towards that Accent Flex platform that are in the OVT. We have one Delta Pine Thrive On. We have Next Gen and Armor. Armor's new in the county trial this year. Dynagrove's got a Thrive On. I'll have to look back at the numbers.
Well, and that's good. I mean, to be honest, I'd looked. You'd sent me the list that was in there, and I haven't paid too terrible much attention to it. And usually I don't look at it before we plant the thing as to how many were in it last year. And I look at it differently. I mean, Brian knows that, and everybody knows listening that we put the bacterial blight scores in there. I actually go out, backpack the bacterial blight organism on there, and then evaluate those plots because I think it's that important. And then we pick it and actually look at yield, but we don't post the yield on inoculated versus not inoculated.
It's good to have that score in there because a lot of people pay attention to that.
Oh, and it's the one disease that for the better part of the last 13 years, I probably have focused more attention on that particular disease than I have a lot of other things just because it can be so potentially devastating.
Yeah.
And it's one that I think everybody really needs to pay really good attention to. Make sure whatever you plant's resistant, because the susceptible stuff, you're going to see that disease, period.
Yeah. A lot of growers have, they started to incorporate more phytogen acres, maybe not gone wall to wall, but in some of their problematic spots based on their dicamba availability.
Yeah, and I was going to say they've done some of that, I'm sure, in nematodes, because they have probably the best set of nematode-resistant varieties available, either runiform or root knot, or in some cases both. And then everything from that particular seed company is bacterial blight resistant, and I would say it almost borders on being immune. You see so little blight even when you put as much out as we put out, because it's laughable sometimes how much disease you'll see after you spray that. That's what I tend not to tell people too often, but I try to walk plots by myself because, plant pathologists get giddy about things, and that's one of the things I get giddy about.
Just looking at the immunity, basically.
Oh, immunity, and then how much you can see like right next to it, a perfectly susceptible variety that will just, the bacteria will ooze off the leaves, 3 weeks after you inoculate the stuff on there. I'm just getting a stare from Jason.
No, I was going to say, I don't like to think while I'm rating. Therefore, in my case, I like to have enough pigweeds, grass, whatever.
Yeah, it's nice to see.
I don't want to have to decide is that a 80 or a 70. I want it to be very obvious that it's a 90 or a 20.
You can see some really obvious 60s, like 60% of the foliage exhibiting symptom expression. And then you can walk right next to it and find a 1. When you have to struggle to look for bacterial blight, and in some cases it's, you can see a lot of zeros. There are a lot of zeros. And then there are some that are smoked, 60s.
Yeah. Back to the nematode thing. Last year, it's hot and dry, and I think a lot of people are paying attention to, nematode tolerant varieties if they have that problem, or, putting in some Aglogic or something. But depending on the summer, it's just that much more exploited on a dry year.
Well, and I would say a hot, dry year. We've seen 22 and 23 to me were probably two of the hotter, drier years sandwiched together. And you really saw places where we struggled with some nematode populations that I don't think people were extremely aware of. So I think we've picked up some places that people have become more aware that they need to do something about it. Lots of people ask, what kind of numbers do I need to be concerned about from an economic threshold standpoint? Look, if you have so many that the plant's crashing, you really don't necessarily need to test to see what your numbers are. Look at the roots. If the roots are showing galling, it's a root knot problem. If they're not, you might want to get that one tested because it could be reniform. Let's at least double check that one and then make a decision from there. Because we've not done a good job with rotation. And I think in the back of my mind, the hard part is when you talk about a rotational strategy, sometimes we forget the word strategy, because corn, cotton, and soybean should not be rotated if you have a root knot problem. And while you are rotating, that's not a good strategy to rotate with, because they're all three susceptible to the root knot nematode, the southern root knot nematode that would impact corn, cotton, and soybean.
But without those three, your rotation strategies become limited, especially your lucrative rotation strategies.
Because you need to consider incorporating peanut, and I get to where a lot of people don't have the equipment that they can deal with that, or just the knowledge, and sometimes it's hard to completely change course and go with something like peanut. So, and then economically speaking, that's maybe not be advantageous.
Yeah, it's a little harder to just step into peanuts than corn or... Early on, we don't really know. We're at the point we don't know what's coming. We don't know what kind of year we're going to have. It could turn off wet. It could turn off dry. But one thing we do know, based on the years past, is, and it's been a bigger problem in the hills than the delta, is the deer. We're going to be getting some calls about deer feeding. We've said it before, but it used to not be an issue 20 years ago. Never, and cotton especially.
Yeah, you never heard about deer eating cotton. Beans one thing, but not cotton.
But I don't know what you do about it. You can spray deterrent or shoot them or get depredation permits. We're still trying to quantify that and how devastating is it. I think it comes down to level of deer, quantity, timing.
I got some electric fence stretched across some pretty big areas down there around Natchez that kind of stagger the imagination. Those are some big bottoms down there, and they have got a ton of wire stretched around those.
Yeah.
Because deer are such a tremendous issue in some of those river bottoms.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen them mow an entire, not a very big soybean field, but an entire soybean field down to nothing. So I can only imagine. But I've not, that I recall, I haven't run across a field where I've seen an issue with deer, but I could see where that would be a problem in some parts of the state.
Yeah, mainly where there's smaller fields and, surrounded by wood lines. And then weather, I'm sure, has a factor. If it plays an important role. If it's vigorously growing, that probably helps. But if you get into, like a slow growing period, it seems like every year it's gotten a little bit worse.
Brian, over the past really week, and the weather has changed pretty dramatically since then, temperature-wise. I mean, we've got a good stretch of days now that we've been over 80. But I got a fair amount of calls and texts and pictures and stuff with metribuzin injury on soybeans. So, that may be one thing to look out for, because we got a lot of that same mode of action goes out on cotton between Cotaran and Caparol and Direx. But again, the weather has really shifted now. We feel like we're into full-blown spring now. We're not getting those couple of nights that got down in the 40s whatever week that was. The 10-day forecast now is mid-80s and mid-60s for highs and lows. So that's definitely a positive on the herbicide injury, but that's one thing that could possibly come up, just thinking through early season possibilities.
Yeah, especially with been telling people, be sure, lay down your pre-emergent herbicides, try to have a barrier there for start clean, stay clean. If we get some, rains at the right, as the cotton's emerging, get some rains, I could see having some injury there, some Cotaran or whatever you're using. But if it stays warm and growing, it should be fine.
Yeah.
Grow through it.
Jason, anything new on the dicamba front for 2024 going into 2025 even?
Not since the winter, Tom. So the labels for those products, XtendiMax and Ingenia and Tavium, were vacated in February, and there's been no change in the regulation since then. They issued the existing stock order, so there's some in circulation. You'd have to be really dialed into the retail level to know how much is actually in circulation, because some had gotten purchased in the fall, long before any of that happened, and then there was some available around the time of the labels being vacated. So I don't have a really good handle on how much is out there, Tom, to be used, but there's some. Certainly not enough to do everything we want to do with it. Some people may have enough for their farm, but across the landscape, no, there's not enough to operate like we have the past few years. What 2025 brings, I'd be a liar if I even speculated at this point, because I have no idea how they're going to approach that for 2025. The Endangered Species Act thing is still out there, and that herbicide strategy plays into this on some level.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure there's still a lot of information that will be coming forward over the next several months about the bulk of that. And obviously not a lot of chatter right now going on, just because there's planters rolling still and all the rest of that.
But that new herbicide strategy is due sometime in the next few weeks or months, and that'll definitely influence how decisions are made for 2025.
Which, we've all had conversations behind the scenes amongst us. You and I have talked about that, and I would hesitate to say boring, but that is the one thing that will influence just about every single one of us in agriculture moving forward. So it's something we're all going to have to pay attention to.
And it's not just herbicides. The insecticide strategy is due, or proposed insecticide strategy is due to be released at some point in the near future. The fungicide strategy is being prepared. So this is going to touch all facets of crop protection in the very near future, whether it's 2025 or 2026. But it's something that we all need to start wrapping our mind around. And I think you can't wrap your mind around it completely in one chunk because it's so dense, man. Just the herbicide, that original herbicide strategy, I don't remember how many pages it was, but it's not something you're going to sit down and read, and it certainly wasn't something you were going to sit down and read and absorb.
No.
So you got to kind of take it in chunks.
What I saw was a pretty small font, so it would take you a period of time to decipher it, digest it, and you'd probably have to come back to it multiple times to read it. Probably 2 or 3 times to get an idea exactly what it's talking about. And even then, I don't know that you'd have all of it down.
You still have to reference it, keep looking back at it.
Yeah.
Brian, with all that to digest on a pretty early season, at least from a cotton perspective right now, what's probably one important take-home message for the season, at least at this point?
I would say take advantage of the weather that we're having right now. We are in the optimal window starting today and tomorrow. And by the time this airs, we'll be towards the end of that. So planting date is something you can't fix. I mean, you either plant in the best time or not. So I'd say try to take advantage of the weather. Good agronomic practices, try to plant in moisture, plant for a stand.
Well,
we'll see where we are next time.
Soil temps have to be just about perfect right now, too. So,
yeah, I would think so.
I would think that's not going to be something that's going to delay anybody at this point.
We're having a really good window right now at a good time of year, so that's a good thing.
Man, we appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm glad to come see y'all.
Particularly appreciate you making a special trip over here just to visit with us. So good luck. I hope all the on-farm stuff goes well. I know that's a logistics hurdle for y'all to get through.
It's fun there.
To get all that stuff where it needs to go at the right time. So I know everybody appreciates y'all doing that, and Trent's folks doing it, and Eric's folks, and everybody else.
Yeah, man. It's really good to see you.
All right. Y'all be good. Talk to you later.
The Mississippi Crop Situation Podcast is a production of Mississippi State University Extension.